Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on Thomas of Woodstock and we get to hear from King Richard II today in Act 3, Scene 1. So the stuff that is going on so far, Richard found out that he's actually almost 22, so he doesn't need a Lord Protector anymore, so he fired all of his uncles, which everybody except for Richard and the Flatterers thinks is a terrible idea. Even Queen Anne is like, this is a terrible idea, and she was lamenting with the Duchess of Gloucester and the Duchess of Ireland about what a terrible idea this is, that he is being advised by these flatterers as opposed to by his uncles who are older and wiser and have more experience. So Act 3, Scene 1, we are at court hanging out with Richard and the flatterers, and they are all decked out in fancy new clothes, which remember, they took all sorts of money from shipments that were brought in, and Richard redistributed that wealth to his flatterers instead of to the people. And some of the fruits of that is they bought fancy new clothes. So Act 3, Scene 1, they come in these fancy new clothes, and Tressilian is whispering something to the king. And what he's whispering to the king, we find out once the king starts to speak, is that he has this idea to send out blank charters, which are basically checks, around the countryside. And anybody who's able to write their name is supposed to come and sign one of these checks, because the people who can sign their names tend to be men, landowners, people who have some money, and maybe the occasional widow. So anybody that can is supposed to write down their name on one of these completely blank charters, which they will then bring back to the king, and he can then fill in the amount that that person owes at a later date and say, oh, no, you signed this saying that you were going to give us this much money, and that's how they're going to be able to collect even more money from people who already don't have a lot and are just about ready to mutiny. So everybody in the room, anyway, Richard and his flatterers, they all think that this is a grand idea, but they do give Tressilian a little bit of crap because he hasn't shaved his beard yet. If you remember, when the uncles were all fired, they were like, we should make a law that nobody with a beard is allowed back in court again. Well, Tressilian has kept his, and he doesn't want to shave, so they give him a little bit of grief about that. But then Queen Anne enters, and Richard is like, oh, look at my lovely queen. She's so interested in being a housewife and doing all of those wonderful housewife things that women are supposed to do. But you know, dear Nan, you don't have to work anymore, and you're safe now. We're not going to have to deal with my meddling uncles anymore, and say hello to my lovely noble friends. And he's gesturing to the flatterers, and she's like, well, you know, any of your friends are welcome here. And Richard says, these are our counselors, I tell ye, lady, and these shall better grace King Richard's court than all the doting heads that late controlled us. Thou seest already we begin to alter the vulgar fashions of our homespun kingdom. I tell thee, Nan, the states of Christendom shall wonder at our English royalty. We held a council to devise these suits. Sir Henry Green devised this fashion shoe. Bushy this peak, Bagot and Scroop set forth this kind coherence twixt the toe and knee, to have them chained together lovingly. And we, as sovereign, did confirm them all. Suit they not quaintly, Nan, sweet queen, resolve me. So this is Richard saying, this is the new court, and aren't we doing a great job? Look at what we've done already. We held a council to put together some fancy outfits. You know, he suggested this part, and he suggested that part, and me in my infinite wisdom, I approved all of it. And don't we look just lovely? It's a very weird little monologue, but it's very much him just sort of showing off and trying to get her approval to some extent. Though, you know, if you're playing King Richard in this, you can decide whether or not you actually want her approval or not. You know, that's maybe something to play with. But he's like, you know, check this out. Isn't this great? We don't have to deal with the uncles anymore. And don't we look so fabulous? And she's like, yeah, the clothes are lovely, but are you sure that getting rid of the wisest men in the kingdom, those being your uncles, are you sure that that was the best idea, at which point like all of them sort of pounce on her, not physically but verbally. They all pounce, and they're like, the king is old enough to make his own decisions, and they were holding him back, and they had stupid ideas anyway, and this is the best for him to be making decisions on his own without the help of those silly old fuddy-duddies anymore. And Richard is like, no, we don't need to be dwelling on that. Why don't we go check out the new Westminster, because it's so beautiful, we've just rebuilt it. And Green is like, yes, let's all go out and let's show off our fancy new clothes, because what's the fun of having new clothes if you don't get to parade through the streets and show people how fabulous you look? And Richard is going to have some more thoughts on that front in tomorrow's monologue. So I'll see you then. Mwah.